Since the very dawn of human consciousness, mankind has been racked by fear. Fear of the enemy, fear of the powerful forces of nature, fear of everything that cannot be simply explained. And from that fear springs a belief in something, a god, a token, a chant, some sign in the sky or on the wind. Anything that might forewarn of impending misfortune or give us one vital chance to avoid unspeakable evil. That's when we put our trust in superstition.
Superstition. Most of us just laugh at it. At the very best, we only half believe in it. And at worst, dismiss it as nonsense. But for others, superstition is serious, sometimes deadly serious. It dominates their lives, deciding what they do or don't do, dictating every waking hour, and even filling their dreams. From the astrological musings of the Reagan presidency to the prediction of a storefront psychic in your neighborhood, many today still believe forces beyond human control can and do influence their lives.
Dance like this has played a vital part in the lives of primitive people for tens of thousands of years. Ritual dance helps appease gods who may be angry. It appeals to the forces of nature to be generous and kindly. Dance also atones for the sins of the tribe and symbolically punishes those who violate the laws. Even today, in the 21st century, in an age where computers and science dominate the world, these ritualistic steps are still followed with religious fervor in remote places around the globe. There are still places today where superstition holds real power. In fact, so powerful that it can actually kill. And sometimes, even from ancient graves, it has.
Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king.
A stern and clear warning to those who would desecrate the Egyptian tomb of King Tutankhamun. The king was only 19 when he died in 1325 BC. Egypt's best architects designed secure burial structures with heavy granite slabs to block passageways or incorporate hidden rooms. Others placed a curse on the entrance.
As for anybody who shall enter this tomb in his impurity, I shall wring his neck as a bird's.
In 1891, a young Englishman named Howard Carter arrived in Egypt to search for the lost tombs of King Tut. After years of exploration, Carter was eventually backed by the wealthy Lord Carnarvon. On November 4th, 1922, Carter found wonderful things inside Tutankhamun's tomb, and the curse and others like it were forgotten.
As for him who shall destroy this inscription, he shall not reach his home. He shall not embrace his children. He shall not see success.
A few months later, Lord Carnarvon, 57, was taken ill. He died a few days later from an infection started by an insect bite. Legend has it that when he died, all the lights throughout Cairo went out. Others reported strange coincidences.
When the mummy of Tutankhamun was unwrapped insect in 1925. It was found to have a wound on the left cheek in the same position as the insect bite on Carnarvon. By 1929, 11 people connected with the discovery of the tomb had died of unnatural causes. The press followed the deaths carefully and, by 1935, had credited the mummy's curse with 21 victims.
Carter was the greatest of all skeptics, and while those who grew to fear the curse died around him, he continued to scoff and lived to a reasonable age of 66 before dying of entirely natural causes.
As for any man who shall destroy these, it is the god Thoth who shall destroy him.
But superstition is not just the preservation of a distant past or isolated tribes. The modern world, too, has its superstitions. Unlucky numbers, the devil's numbers, numbers of fortune and misfortune, numbers that bring you closer to God or nearer to damnation.
I think superstitions have deep meanings for people that they like to hold on to give their life meaning. But I think the other reason is that it's based in fear. And fear is very widespread. It can have a lot of different labels and symbols. But from my own experience, people who quote superstitions are doing it when they feel fearful.
Why do we so fear Friday the 13th? Why did the number 13 hold such significance for the ancient Druids and the Aztecs? Was it just superstitious nonsense? Or did it have a dire meaning? Even in the modern world, we are gripped by superstition. Engineers and planners bow down to ancient beliefs and deliberately skip the number 13 on buildings and in elevators. What is it that we really fear? Numbers are not the only remnants of the Dark Ages that we still cling to. Superstition makes many of us truly fear black cats. It is a fear going back to when it was thought witches could switch from between human and cat. Transforming witches may be few and far between today, but the superstitions born out of fear and ignorance still lie just beneath the surface in all of our psyches. It doesn't take much to summon up the demons, even in this age of knowledge and sophistication. Superstition about Friday the 13th is one of the most powerful and all-pervading superstitions in the Western world. Of all the ancient representations of bad luck, Black Friday has managed to survive into the modern world. Friday the 13th is the perfect name for a virus to infect modern computer systems so that the devil can thwart the labors of honest men. But there's always an exception to the rule. The Spanish fear Tuesday the 13th. But still, it's the number 13 that has had sinister overtones to it since the start of recorded history. Many scholars have kept a record of despair of this blackest of numbers.
Alexander the Great decided he should be elevated to the status of a god to keep the 12 other gods company. Shortly afterwards, Alexander died. 13 became a feared numeral. Alexander didn't learn from history, for King Philip II, Alexander's father, insisted a statue of himself be carried along with those of the 12 major gods. His own men assassinated him.
Superstition about the number 13 was given greater impetus with the betrayal of Jesus Christ by Judas. Judas was the 13th person to sit down at the table for the Last Supper. But the stories surrounding the number 13 are filled with contradictions.
The Aztecs in Central America believed there were 13 skies in the universe. The ancient Mexicans' week had 13 days. And the Sumerians had a zodiac chart which included 13 constellations. The number 13 for these advanced civilizations was a revered number.
Superstition can be a very powerful force, cutting deep into the very mind and soul of those who believe. In fact, some naval traditions to this day are deeply rooted in superstition. Nearly 3 centuries ago, the British Navy, which reigned supreme over all the world's oceans, tried to dispel superstitions among sailors that it was courting death to set sail on Friday the 13th. The Navy's plan was simple enough, but things didn't quite work out the way the Admiralty planned.
We, the Royal Navy, had a vessel especially built to demonstrate there was nothing to fear from that most ridiculously feared date. We called our Navy's newest vessel HMS Friday, and when she was completed, we launched her, rather defiantly, on Friday the 13th. We chose a skipper called Captain Friday and did round up a crew of fine salts who weren't superstitious. And as a final proof of the Navy's belief that there was nothing to fear, the ship set to sea on Friday the 13th. Soon after clearing port, HMS Friday vanished. The ship and her crew were never to be seen or heard of again.
A ship of the 20th century, the spacecraft Apollo 13 also fell victim to the curse of the numbers.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff. Liftoff.
Apollo 13 is the only NASA space mission to the moon that failed to meet its primary objective, landing on the moon. Ground control detailed every astounding event.
Right from the start, the mission seemed jinxed. Bad weather delayed its launch, and it finally headed for the heavens at 13:13 hours Central Time. The mission in 1970, under the command of James A. Lovell, ran from April 11 to April 17. On April 13, just after a media conference between the spacecraft and Earth, things started to go wrong. Apollo 13 was already halfway to the moon when an oxygen tank on board exploded, damaging many of the spacecraft systems, knocking out power, water, and heating to the command module. The problem was signaled to the astronauts by control panel light warning number 13. And exactly 13 minutes after the first explosion, James Lovell happened to look out of the left-hand window and saw the spacecraft's oxygen supply fading off into space.
Ground control was forced to devise radical new uses of space technology in just a matter of hours to get the hapless crew of Apollo 13 back to Earth. It was close, but all 3 astronauts returned safely. They were left forever wondering about the curse of the number 13. In Jim Lovell's case, 13 proved to be a lucky number. Just a month later, he won a charity raffle with ticket number, you guessed it, 13. It seems that when it comes to the number 13, the odds are stacked against us. 13 seems to be a number we can't escape. A morbid fear of this number is known as triskaidekaphobia. So I guess we're all a little triskaidekaphobic.
And why not? Take an ordinary deck of playing cards. There are 52 cards in all, but would you believe if you break them down into suits, then that number appears again. 13 hearts, 13 spades, 13 diamonds, and 13 clubs or clovers. Some gamblers say 13 is a lucky number, not unlucky, and they're prepared to bet everything on it. That's why France's national lottery runs a special Friday the 13th lottery. For millions of Chinese around the world, it's not the number 13 that evokes fear, but the number 4.
For the Chinese, 4 is the unluckiest of numbers, and traditionalists will do almost anything to avoid it. If you look carefully at the seating arrangements in most Chinese restaurants, you'll discover that places around the table are set for either 3 or 5 people, never 4.
The number 4 here, in Chinese writing here, it pronounced as say. Say means in Chinese pronounced means dead. So it's not really good because pronunciation is very close to the word dead. So anything to do with 4, the people are very cautious. Like combination number 14, and that means you go to die. And 24 means easy to die. So everything to do the 4 combined together is not a good sign. It's not a good number. That's why a lot of people don't want to buy the apartment number 14, and don't want to buy the business number 14, and don't want a business house number 14.
Even sophisticated Chinese business people traveling the world won't willingly tempt fate by associating with the unluckiest of numbers.
Superstition is a matter of what you believe. Some superstitions go back so far that no one can pinpoint exactly when they started. Who can tell how long they've feared black cats or why a broken mirror brings 7 years' misery? But there is one superstition we do have an exact date for. Unlucky Friday the 13th.
The anxiety we all have about Friday the 13th can be traced back to an early medieval religious and military order called the Knights of the Temple of Solomon, or Knights Templar. The Knights Templar were originally formed in Jerusalem in 1119 by 2 French knights, Hugh de Payne and Godfrey of Saint-Omer. The Knights defended Jerusalem until it fell to the Muslims in 1187. Historians recall,
Gradually, the Knights Templar became less and less men of arms and more men of means, as well as the bankers. The Knights Templar often transmitted money and supplies between Europe and Palestine, and as a result they developed an efficient banking system, something the nobility and wealthy in Europe came to rely on. They were even said to be the keepers of the Holy Grail, legendary chalice Christ used at the Last Supper. The order's immense riches and real power accumulated to the point where it irked both religious and non-religious authority. In 1307, the almost impoverished King Philip IV of France, aided by Pope Clement V, plotted to bring the order to its knees. Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the order, was arrested. Molay and other office bearers were faced with fabricated charges of sacrilege and Satanism. The Knights Templar had to be discredited in the public's eye before the king and the church could grab the spoils. Molay and his knights were mercilessly tortured until they confessed to crimes they hadn't committed.
in the end, all were burnt at the stake. The day, Friday the 13th. As he burned, Jacques de Molay cursed both the Pope and the King.
From this day, Friday the 13th, may the King and the Pope be forever cursed!
His wish was fulfilled. Both King Philip and Pope Clement died within a year, but not before the fortune of the Knights Templar was confiscated and the order officially suppressed. That, so legend has it, is why and how the superstition about Friday the 13th came into being. A superstition born of greed, treachery, and above all, evil.
Superstitious. That's what most of us are to a greater or lesser degree. And when you ask people to identify something they're superstitious about, most will tell you black cats. For some, having a black cat cross your path means bad luck. But strangely, for others, a black cat supposedly brings good luck.
Love them or loathe them, cats have been part of human existence for more than 8,000 years.
Around 400 BC, cats were elevated to almost godlike status, and the Egyptian goddess of fertility and motherhood, Bastet, had a woman's body with a cat's head. Over the next millennium, cats spread right across Europe, with Roman soldiers taking the first cats to places like France, Germany and Britain, probably as mice catchers to protect stored grain.
In just a matter of 100 years, cats, especially black ones, went from being revered to reviled. It had happened because of superstition. In medieval Europe, belief in witchcraft ran rife, and superstition ran people's lives. Black cats suddenly became symbols of evil, the sinister companions of witches. Many people believed that black cats were witches in disguise. But King Charles I of England was a man who placed great faith in the good luck his black cat brought him. Historians have the doomed tale of Charles well documented.
One of the new king's first decisions was to go to war against Spain and France. His campaigns were abject failures. At home, Charles was at war too, with Parliament. He eventually plunged Britain into civil war that led to the formation of a republic under Oliver Cromwell. Throughout the turmoil, King Charles believed luck was on his side, and he kept his pet black cat near him always. So precious did the king think the cat was. It was kept under guard so it would not be stolen or harmed. But the tide turned against the king, and even his cat became ill and died. Within 24 hours of the cat's death, King Charles was arrested and imprisoned on the Isle of Wight. On January the 30th, 1649, as punishment for spilling the blood of England, Charles I was taken to Whitehall and beheaded.
Kings and courtiers were not the only ones who placed great stock in superstitions about black cats. In fishing villages all over Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, sailors' families would keep a black cat in their home as an omen of good fortune. Cats were kept aboard ships primarily as mousers to stop the ship's provisions being gnawed away by rodents. But cats, especially black ones, were also considered good luck aboard ships. As ancient seafarers told it,
A sailor who is approached by the ship's cat is in for good luck. But a sailor who is only half approached and then the cat merely saunters away, well, he's in for bad luck, and lots of it. And if a sailor wants to bring the worst possible luck, a storm violent enough to wreck the ship, then throwing a black cat overboard is the way to invite that disaster.
many superstitions which had their beginnings hundreds of years ago are still valid today. The superstition that breaking a mirror will bring 7 years bad luck is just as much believed today by some people as it was 2 centuries ago. Some social researchers believe the superstition about broken mirrors actually goes back to ancient Greece.
It was regarded as the realm of the true gods to look into mirrors, not ordinary mortals. The superstition took on new significance during the Renaissance period in Europe, when the well-to-do could afford expensive and decorative mirrors. After all, it could take 7 years to save up for a replacement.
Quite a few superstitions, in fact, seem to relate more to money than some deep emotional set of values. From the earliest times in Europe, salt was regarded as a luxury item. In fact, the ancient Celts, with their salt mines in what is Austria today, became wealthy merchants dealing salt to the rest of Europe.
Because salt was so highly prized and valuable, to spill it was regarded as the work of the devil. To atone for the offense, the spiller of salt had to throw a pinch of salt over his or her left shoulder. The left shoulder, of course, signifying the devil's domain.
You've already seen how superstitions have developed through the ages, and how from medieval times right through to today in European culture, superstitions still affect our lives. Let's look at another of those quirks surrounding the number 13.
In tarot cards, the number 13 is the death card. And in the Old Testament of the Bible, the god of sacrifice or death is known as El. If you write down the name of the god of sacrifice, E-L, and then hold the paper up to a mirror to reverse the image, what do you get? Yes, the number 13. Spooky, huh? Well, that's not half as spooky as some of the superstitions that play a very real part in the lives of villagers living in remote parts of Papua New Guinea. Dance and superstition are irrevocably intertwined in the culture of these people from the remote highlands area of New Guinea. Recorded history shows white interaction is still a recent event.
Here is culture from the Stone Age that was suddenly forced to confront the modern world little more than 60 years ago. For these people, the dance honours the spirits of good and evil. For it is the spirits, or tambourans, who determine whether a man succeeds in battle, whether a family has enough to eat, and whether a woman bears a child or not. To the Highlanders of Papua New Guinea, the pig is the most valuable possession, and much of their culture and superstition revolves around this animal. But to the Tolai people, who live on New Britain, a large island off the mainland, legends and superstitions are rooted in very different objects. Duk-duks, giant cone-like figures made of woven glass, loom largely in Tolai society. The duk-duks are both feared and feted by the locals. Village children will scramble to see the duk-duks, but are ever mindful of keeping a safe distance in case they evoke the wrath of the spirit men.
Basically, the duk-duks do a season of dancing, moving from village to village. They act as mediators between the spirit world and the human world. They possess the powers of the most commanding of spirits, and as such, are able to drive away others that might bring misfortune. Daryl Sparks, anthropologist who has worked extensively with indigenous people, understands the power of belief.
It's an interesting proposition to believe that supernatural evil can exist in a real form. A lot of these people actually believe this. A lot of indigenous cultures believe that this actually happens, that evil is a tangible thing, that you can actually manifest or touch even in a way and transport from one area to another. I think a lot of the time it's the strength of not the individual belief, but the group belief.
But they are a secret society, and some highly ranked members of the society, according to superstition, have the power of life and death. These duk-duks, known as tumbuwan, appear in the usual conical grass costume, but with one major addition: eyes. These eyes enable them to see evildoers and people who have seriously broken tribal law. Duk-duks with eyes have the power to dance people to death. And today, no one would recklessly challenge a superstition that has helped bind Tolai society together for 1,000 years.
The Aborigines of Australia also have superstitions in their complex culture that go back at least 80,000 years. And one of the most powerful superstitions among Aborigines from the desert country in the center of Australia is that of the Gadaisha Man, an entity from the spirit world who brings death to those who deserve the ultimate punishment. Listen and watch carefully.
You've just seen and heard the Gadaisha Man.
He moves silently, invisible to mere mortals, leaving no footmarks because he makes the wind blow them away. Aboriginal Dreamtime is full of stories of the Gadaisha Man's relentless pursuit. The Gadaisha will travel thousands of kilometres over many months if necessary to bring death to those who have broken the most important of tribal laws. Be assured, no one outruns the Gadaisha Man. He will always catch up with you, for eventually you must sleep, and that's when he will strike. His feather-like touch brings instant death. The Gadaisha Man leaves no evidence of his deadly visit, except for a corpse lying in the sleeping position. Trying to catch the Gadaisha Man is futile, and the terrifying encounter etched in the faces of the dead will give new life to this most deadly of superstitions.
Well, the Gadaisha Man is evil depending on what side of the fence you're on. If you're in your own group, your Gadaisha Man is very much the protector of your group. And each group has its own Gadaisha Man. Whereas your Gadaisha Man is your protector of your group, other Gadaisha Men are seen as evil. the prevalent thing you always struck is they're very modernised people. Aboriginal people aren't live in the old tribal sort of ways. They're very industrial. They drive cars. They have microwaves. They live in houses and everything like that. But it's interesting when it comes to the idea of the Kadachi man. It suddenly sends terror into the heart of all of them, and I think it's just the idea of how powerful, or the powerful magic that the Kadachi man can summon up, that spreads this terror. So even though they're very modernised and industrial, they're terrified of the power of the Kadachi man.
What exactly is superstition? In essence, I suppose it's a set of beliefs based on ideas and notions usually handed down from generation to generation. It could be argued, of course, that religious faiths like Christianity might seem like superstitions to an outsider. Most superstitions, of course, do no real harm to anyone. But as you're about to find out, there are exceptions.
It is hard to imagine a more remote and harsher place. Daytime temperatures hover around 36 degrees centigrade year-round, and the only thing that changes is the humidity. Halls Creek is difficult to find on the map. No wonder, because it is more than 1,800 kilometers from the nearest town and more than 4,000 kilometers from the nearest city.
Halls Creek, I'm not ashamed to say, is a dot on the landscape in the far north of Western Australia. Aircraft operated by the famous Flying Doctor Service has to fly in to provide an ambulance service. Life is tough here.
In the early 1980s, a young doctor, David Shields, who had been specializing in tropical medicine, went to work in Halls Creek to continue his research. He not only provided medical and emergency aid for the settlement, but he also saw a real need to improve the lifestyle of the local Aboriginal people, especially children.
Look, in many ways, the health standards of non-urban Aboriginal people is very much on a par with anything else in the third world. I mean, it's not good. It's not good. These settlements are close enough to bring in the worst of the Western diet, like junk food, but they're too far away for adequate medical services.
David Shields was aware of the gap that existed between the health of kids elsewhere in Australia and the health of the children from Halls Creek. He set about bridging that gap. Most appreciated the young doctor's efforts, but not everyone.
Look, I was acutely aware of the role the traditional medicine man plays in a society like this. And I have to say, I really did proceed slowly. Lots of consultation and involvement. But the minute it became obvious that modern medicine was working and that people were feeling better, particularly women with babies, infant welfare, that sort of thing, then the level of antagonism from the medicine man towards me and what I was doing really began to rise and rise.
Tensions grew between the doctor from the world of science and the doctor from the world of superstition. David Shields was quite unprepared for what happened next. The death curse had been placed on him. He most certainly did not take the curse lightly.
Oh no, I knew it was no joke. I mean, I know in Western society we make jokes about having the bone pointed at you, but I think that's only because we basically don't understand actually how serious it is. The medicine man was serious, and I knew the full power of his magic was behind that curse. I mean, when you live with a culture every day, you'd be stupid not to take it seriously. I did take it seriously. Local people tell many stories about bone pointing in the modern world.
I'm not quite sure how this happened, but I fronted a group and had what's called the bone pointed at me, which isn't where they just come up and point a bone at you. There's quite a ritualistic sort of thing that happens before it. And the bone was actually like a leg, but what I believe was a leg bone of a human. And came up and they said these words at me in their language, and then presented me with this bag, and I didn't know what it was, and then brought out the bone and displayed it to me. And I thought, oh, something, I know what this is. And a lot of Aboriginal people, if that had happened to them, would have instantly been mortified and quite often struck with paralysis. They have to be hospitalised very soon after this happens to most of them. Fortunately, nothing happened to me. So maybe, I don't count that that magic wasn't powerful enough. It's the system, the belief system, and maybe I was outside of that belief system, and so nothing really happened to me.
Australian Aborigines, it's said, can summon supernatural forces. The candela, or spears of thought, were among their deadliest instruments. Made from carved human bones and hair, they were psychically charged to kill. One event happened here in the Northern Territory where a man called Windu was taken into a hospital. His shirt was soaked with blood, but doctors couldn't find any wound. Tests found he was in perfect health, but dying. Only hours earlier, Windu was the victim of a bone pointing, judged guilty by the members of his tribe. Standard hospital treatment for this condition is to fly an elder down from the desert to sing the patient back. But when the lawbreaker truly knows the bone will kill him, it does. Whatever he believes with all his heart is manifested for him.
I was taken out to what's called a kipper ring, which is one of the most sacred sites of the Aboriginal people. It's where they initiate the young males into adulthood, and there's a lot of spilling of blood on the side where they scarify themselves and things like that. I had been told, don't go into the kipper ring because uninitiated males or women will die as a result of this. And the Aboriginal ranger was telling me, that this was very strong Kadaitcha medicine, that the Kadaitcha men, ran the initiations, and it was like this ring was one of the strong centres of their power. And while I'm videotaping it, I just kind of obliviously walked into the middle of the ring. I didn't even notice. And next thing I know, this ranger had grabbed me and physically dragged me out and started saying to me, oh, this is the worst thing that could happen, you're in a lot of danger, it's quite possible you're going to die. And I was thinking, I can understand and respect your belief in this, but I kind of doubted a little bit. Anyway, 3 days later, I was struck down with a middle ear infection, the flu, and the worst migraine headache of my life, and I was just paralysed in bed. There was nothing I could do. And I kept thinking Kadaitcha magic all the time. And I contacted the ranger who I'd been with and said, oh look, I am so sick. And so he sent me a package, and I'm not sure what they were. They were a string of beads, which I placed around my neck. And he said, wear these because I'm not sure, blessed or in their situation blessed. And I wore them, and 3 days later I was fine. Now, whether or not I would have been fine anyway, I'm not quite sure. Whether the psychological power of the magic works on human beings quite strongly.
For David Shields, it was a test of wills. Increasingly, though, David felt he couldn't fight alone. So he turned to a power much greater than himself. A power he believed could overcome the evil power of superstition.
Yes, I did ask God for help. Look, it's pretty straightforward. A curse like bone pointing, or anything for that matter, relies on belief to make it work. It's a psychological warfare, if you like. And I was determined I wasn't going to be the loser. As a kid, I'd had a religious upbringing, and being out here in the wilds all by myself, basically I felt I needed someone or something with a bit more power than I could find within myself. Saying a few prayers and asking for a bit of divine intervention to make sure that the curse didn't take effect isn't all that strange, I wouldn't have thought.
David and Linda Shields left Halls Creek and started a new life on the other side of the country. 20 years on, David claims the death curse is not much more than something in the back of his mind. But in fact, during the research for this story, David Shields was contacted and interviewed. But after a request for an on-camera interview, he confided in us that he would have to say some prayers and ask if he should proceed. 24 hours passed, and he declined, stating a greater power advised against it. We did his interview with actors and changed names to respect his wishes. Is this the continuation of a spiritual battle between cultures, between good and evil? Is it a dim memory for him Or does the struggle still rage in the soul of David Shields to this day?
Yes, I think God answered my prayers because I'm still here.
Black cats, lucky and unlucky numbers, death curses. Is superstition just a load of nonsense? Is it meaningless mind games from days long past? Or is there a power beyond human understanding that can affect our lives, for better or worse, for good or evil?
Fear keeps regenerating itself through the centuries, which is why superstition is still alive and well.
If you take, say, the Christian religion, for example, if one person believed in the resurrection, they'd probably call them a nutter. You know, people don't come back from the dead. If a whole community of people believe in the resurrection, then it must be true, because everybody can't be wrong all the time. And so it reinforces that sort of notion and that belief system of the supernatural can and does occur because we all believe in it. We all believe that it does occur, so therefore it will.
Superstition. We all know the one about not walking under a ladder. But did you know there's an antidote? If you accidentally do walk under a ladder, cross your fingers and don't uncross them again until you see a dog. For the Sci-Fi Channel, I'm James Reeves.